9 months ago, I shot a video about my concerns raising my biracial daughter here in Japan. Right now, she's a year and a half, and when I shot that video, she was exactly 9 months old. So I wanted to give you guys an update on how things have evolved since the time of that video, and to just fill you in on some new thoughts related to my concerns raising her here in Japan, specifically in Tokyo. So she's just started nursery school, which is called Hoikuen here in Japan. And so far that experience has actually been really, really good. She's actually just completed her first week. So, she's still clinging to me when I drop her off, and it's hard to hand her off to these people at the nursery school, but they're all extremely kind, obviously very caring, very considerate people. And every time I pick her up, she's having a good time and she's happy to see me. And so far, so good on that front. I think nursery school and probably early education in general, I'm not sure until what age, is completely okay. Two friends of mine met for lunch a few weeks ago, and one of them was outlining a thorough comparative analysis of life here in Japan versus life in his or his partner's respective home countries. And this was the most thorough analysis I have ever seen, with charts. They had plot points marked on graphs, different areas, and each area was a quadrant related to this and that. It was unbelievable. It was like nothing I had seen before. And I found that I resonated with a lot of the general concerns that this particular friend had. And those are essentially that some of the issues related to living in Japan are both important, but also unchangeable. And that presents quite a big problem. And what I mean more specifically is that, when I looked at this friend's analysis, I would never necessarily go as far as he did, but massive kudos to him for doing it, because in looking at it, I realized it was a really great way of assessing life here in Japan, based on obviously his values, interests, all that, and those of his partner. But a lot of the thoughts he had, I resonated with. And again, the kind of crux of the issue was that a lot of the things he took issue with are things that are essentially unchangeable. Of course, you can control your friend circle, or technically where your child goes to school, or where you live, or, those things. But the things we're talking about are things that are beyond that. They're things like how people look at you, for example, as a not Japanese person here in Japan. That's not going to change probably in our lifetimes. Or the complications of learning Japanese. This friend of mine and myself are pretty good at Japanese, but in general, it's probably the hardest or one of the hardest languages for a non-native speaker to learn to speak. So that comes with its own kind of issues. Hasn't been done, of course. Can it be done? Of course. It's just a huge challenge. Versus, for example, living in your home country or in a country where you already speak a language in that country. So in looking at this, I realized there are lots of things that are relatively important, but unfortunately unchangeable. I wish I had this list so I could share in more detail what was on it. Hopefully when he sees this, because I'm sure he will, he'll comment, and maybe he'll outline some of those things that were specifically in the important but unchangeable side of things. Because I think a lot of you watching this, especially those of you who live in Japan, you'll resonate with at least some of those things. And then interestingly, at this same lunch was another friend who had a completely different viewpoint on life in Japan. He also has a young child, and from his perspective, life in Japan is extremely freeing relative to his respective home country. And I also completely resonate with a lot of those feelings. I think one of the great things about living abroad in general, but especially here in Japan, is that I'm so removed from a lot of the drama or politics or things like that related to being back home. And that's one of the things I found very, very liberating about being here in Japan. I've talked about that before. It's one of the best parts, I think, of living abroad, is getting a different perspective, but also just removing yourself from all of the social structure that surrounds you being in your home country. For Japanese people, to flip this around very quickly, the same thing happens when they suddenly leave Japan for a year or two. They kind of change forever. Once you leave Japan and realize you can be yourself in a completely different way in different countries around the world, I think it's very hard for Japanese people to return here, especially if they completely change and really have a chance to immerse themselves in some other culture. I think it makes it, quite challenging to come back here and then be subject to the social constraints that exist here in Japan. It was very interesting getting lunch with these two friends and seeing how much I align with this one friend's analysis, but then also completely aligning with this other friend's general take on life abroad, but specifically here in Japan. As this relates to Jasmine, no final decision has yet been made as to whether or not we as a family, Luna, Josh, Jasmine, myself, and Risa, move in the immediate future to the US. But, especially considering PowerSpot was just built, which is down the road. If you haven't checked it out, go check out PowerSpot. It's our new facility. But in general, we're still very much leaning towards a return to the US in the not too distant future. I've been in Japan for 13 years, and every year, the not too distant future seems to grow into a year or 2 years or 5 years. So realistically, we're both at a place where we're ready to go, but we're also just starting a new business. So we can't leave immediately, but we're definitely interested in making a move as soon as possible. And so far, business is going well, so that's part of the plan. So I'll continue to keep you guys updated on what changes we see as Jasmine continues going to nursery school, continues becoming more vocal. If you haven't seen it already, she's very vocal, but she's not yet speaking properly, and it's actually completely adorable. Nani? Nani? Ah, what are we gonna do about that? So then after that, what should we do? But that Ajibra, I don't quite understand. どういうこと? Yo ji 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 ja? Jo ja jo ji ja ja ja. Ah. I'm actually really excited for her to get to a point where she can express thoughts and feelings with words, because I really like to communicate with words in particular. So I'm really looking forward to being able to have baby level conversations with little Jazzy. And as Josh and Luna get older, I'm really enjoying our ability to converse with each other about a myriad of topics. So I love that about childhood and growth and development. It's something I really personally enjoy, is kind of watching the kids grow and becoming more competent and capable, particularly in expressing how they feel and their thoughts on things, their ideas, all of that. So yeah, overall, I'm loving fatherhood. Jasmine seems to be having a good time with life here in Japan. Josh and Luna are having a great time overall. I think Luna's just become a teenager. Josh just turned 11. Yeah, overall, they're in that stage of life where they're really finding themselves. But so far, so good. And I'll continue to keep you guys updated as things change and evolve. So far, the biggest change in the Jasmine front is definitely her going to nursery school. And so far, that experience has been really good. The other kids are really nice to her. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention earlier, which is actually why I brought up that lunch, is so this friend of mine who has a young child, who I mentioned earlier, was talking about the fact that the things that separate your regular Japanese child from a biracial child don't really seem to impact the child until they turn 5. And I just thought the number was really interesting because it's relatively arbitrary depending on who you talk to. For some people, all is well until you get to junior high school. For some people, all is well until you get to elementary school. For some, it's high school. There isn't really a clear consensus as to at which point exactly things start to change and become really difficult if you're biracial here in Japan. So I don't know firsthand when that is. I can pretty safely say it's not when they're a year and a half or 2 years old, because again, Jasmine's experience in nursery school thus far has been wonderful, and that is in alignment with what everyone told me her experience would be like at this age and at this stage of schooling. So I don't exactly know when it is. If you guys have young kids and they're biracial and they've grown up here in Japan, or if you yourself are biracial and you were raised here in Japan, please feel free to let me know at what point that happens. I'd be curious as to when that is, more specifically so that I can kind of just keep an eye on Jasmine when she turns that age, and again, keep open lines of communication so we can talk about things if they start to happen around that time. I don't really know what that number is. I would guess it's probably around elementary school. So like this friend of mine was saying, probably around maybe 4 or 5 years old. Maybe it's earlier, maybe it's later, maybe it depends on where you are in the city. We're pretty central, so there are bound to be lots of biracial kids in this area. Maybe it's not such a big deal. Honestly, maybe the whole thing, just at this stage, isn't as big a deal as it was for people who are my age or a little bit younger who experienced a more difficult time being biracial. So it's honestly quite possible that things have changed. I'm doubtful, but one way or another, I'll keep you guys posted and updated. So if you haven't seen the original, please make sure to go watch part 1. I think it's something like the one thing that scares me about raising my Blasian daughter here in Japan. There's also a part 2 that follows up with that. You can check that out as well. I think you'll find both of those interesting if this topic is of interest to you. And again, I'll keep you guys updated as things evolve and as things change. But so far, so good. She's exactly a year and a half old, and things are great. So thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications button, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.